Have you ever had the experience where things are going really well in your life, and then you start thinking, it's all probably going to end soon? You ever had that? Because you've had such a good run, you start anticipating that challenges are probably just around the corner. They're coming any minute. I know, they're coming. And then, of course, the challenges do come, don't they? Because that's what you've been thinking about. That's what you've been waiting for, inviting into your life. It's almost like we invite difficulty into our life because things are too good. And for one reason or another, we think there is a limit to the good things that we can have. There's actually a term given to this phenomena. They call it foreboding joy. And it seems to be a very common human experience. It's certainly been part of my own journey. My homily today is titled Accessing Abundance. And I want to talk about how we can begin to heal this psycho-spiritual affliction that can rob us of so much in life. I'm going to end today on a very practical note, but first I want to highlight what I think is a very important distinction between truth and our reality. Truth and reality. But I want to start here on the border of Brazil and Argentina, Iguazu Falls, the largest waterfall system in the world. I was fortunate enough to be there a few years back, and I will never forget how awestruck I was by the sheer volume of water that just kept gushing and gushing and gushing over all these cliffs. Just kept coming and coming. It was insane. You know, it was actually messing with my mind. I was thinking, where does this come from? 24/7. I couldn't help but think, this is another piece of evidence. It's another reminder, or it's a metaphor for the truth of God. That God is abundant. God just keeps giving and giving regardless of whether we need it or not. Regardless of whether it's practical, it's sensible. Regardless of whether we deserve it or not. You know, another memory just comes to mind when I've been scuba diving. You go deep down where no one ever goes, but the fish, the coral, the beauty. I'm thinking, God didn't need to make that. No one sees it. Our first reading today in our gospel is another reminder of this truth of God. In both readings, God not only meets the need, right? There was need, people needed to be fed. And yes, God meets the need. He gives them all the food they want. But he doesn't just do that. Did you notice in both cases, there's also food left over? And I want to suggest to you that that detail is not an accident. It's there as an important reminder that God is an abundant provider. He goes over and above. There is no limit to what God wants to do in our lives, to how God wants to provide for us. There's no sensible measure to which God wants to provide for you. St. John of the Cross was one of the great mystics in our church tradition. And one of his big revelations was that the whole universe is drenched in God. This was the lens through which he understood the world. Yeah, so that everything that we see is the result of a self-outpouring God, a God who just keeps giving and giving and giving, because that's who God is. That's who God is. That's what love does. It keeps pouring itself out. Here are John's words. God pours himself out abundantly without partiality. Wherever he finds space. Is there space in your heart tonight? Like a ray of sunlight, and joyfully discloses himself to people on the footpaths and the highways. In other words, everywhere. He pours it out to people everywhere. This God does not hesitate or disdain to find delight. Again, delight. God delights in pouring himself out. He doesn't do it under duty. Oh, yeah, I've got to do it because I'm God. He delights in us humans. And one of the reasons why the church pays so much attention to John of the Cross is because this truth of God actually became his reality, like it did with many of the saints. He didn't just know about this abundance of God because he learnt about it intellectually, but he had it experienced through some very trying, difficult circumstances. He'd experienced God's overwhelming goodness and providence in his life. For John, truth and reality were one. But the challenge for most of us is that there is often a gap, isn't there, between the truth of who God is and our reality, the reality of our experience, of our thoughts, of our beliefs. For many of us, that's because deep down we carry a fear of scarcity, that there might not be enough for what we need in life, whether that be practical things like money or food or toilet paper during COVID, or spiritual, emotional resources like happiness and love. We fear we won't have enough. There's not enough. And there are all kinds of reasons why we might carry that fear, but I want to suggest that it's often linked to the idea or the belief that God is stingy, that there is a limit to God's goodness and provision and forgiveness and love, that God only gives us what we deserve if we're lucky. And if we mess up, if we make a mistake, then God might just take it all away. Just like our parents took away our favourite toy when we were naughty. This gap between the truth of God and our reality causes all kinds of challenges in our life, but I want to suggest that one of the underlying ones is anxiety. We get anxious because we fear we don't have enough or we won't have enough. We get anxious about losing what we have and being stranded. What's going to happen to me? We get anxious from trying to always get more and more of what we think we need. And this anxiety, as I'm sure we've all experienced, it then causes all kinds of other problems in our life. Tensions in our relationships. It impacts our physical well-being. It leads to conflict and wars and all manner of issues. So many problems in our world, in our life, I suspect come back to this anxiety, to this fear that there's not enough. But you know what I think is even more tragic? That this anxiety often also causes us to kind of close down, to become defensive. And when we're defensive, what we tend to guard ourselves from everything, not just the things that we're afraid of, not just the threats, but even the good things. We guard ourselves from connection, from love, from the things that we most need when this anxiety is operating. And we also, when we're in that defensive mode, we also often stop pursuing the deep dreams and the desires of our heart. This anxiety prevents us from bringing our unique gift, our contribution to the world. Because we're so caught up in trying to sort of secure ourselves. So what do? Well, John of the Cross, once again, he said, when it comes to God, it's not that we expect too much from God. We expect too little. And so, he suggests that we need to expand our expectation in God's faithful and abundant goodness. We need to do our best to align our reality with the truth of God. to remind ourselves that there is nothing stingy in God. It doesn't exist. God's a giver. God's a lover. God's a provider. And God will continue to give to this universe, give to this world, everything that we need to live a genuinely rich life. Here's John again. It says, make his generosity, not your poverty, the measure of your expectations. Oh. Can you see the shift in emphasis he's inviting us to take here? Base your expectations on God's goodness and love, not on what you think you deserve or what you think you're worthy of. Because deep down, we often think we're worthy of not much at all. I want to suggest 3 ways that we can expand our expectation of God's abundance. I offer 3 G's tonight, the 3 G's. All right. Here's the first G, grief. This might sound like an odd place to start, but hear me out. Once again, the saints, and especially John of the Cross, they keep reminding us that we experience God's abundance, especially in our grief, in our loss, in our disappointments, in our suffering. Here's the psalmist. The Lord is close to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit. When we are brave enough to sit in our grief, to feel it, to reflect on it, to invite God and invite a few others into it, then we will open ourselves in a special way to the miraculous abundance of God. We'll see God providing for us compassion and healing and forgiveness and guidance. In a special way, we discover it in and through our grief, in and through our suffering. And here's the thing. If we can find the abundance of God in the worst, most difficult places, we'll find him everywhere. That's the beautiful thing about starting with grief. Second G, gratitude. Gratitude is all about becoming conscious of the abundance that is already in our lives. The more conscious we are of it, the more confidence we will have in this abundance. The more that we will believe it and expect it because we start seeing it more and more and more. So it just becomes part of our consciousness, part of our expectation. That God's good. God provides. God is faithful. So I want to suggest it's good to have a daily practice of gratitude. What I do simply when I'm getting ready for bed, I've got a little journal, a little exercise book, and I write at least one thing I'm grateful for from the day. And I'd want to suggest that when you do that, whatever your practice of gratitude is, try not to just remember it, like using your thoughts, but try and relive that moment. Try and feel it again so it kind of sinks into you more deeply. This is why grace before meals can be good. When we're praying in thanksgiving. It's a reminder that, God, once again, look at this food you've provided for us. Yeah? It increases our awareness of this abundance of God that perhaps often we take for granted. Gratitude. Third G, generous giving. There are all kinds of reasons why it's good to give generously, but one of them is because whenever we give, we are reinforcing the belief that God is abundantly good. There will always be enough for us. Yeah? We might not consciously realize it, but when we're generous, we're saying, I can give something of what I've been given because I know God, there's no limit in God. I won't be left stranded. I don't have to hoard everything I have because God's a generous giver. I'm just like a vessel. I'm a steward. Here's how Jesus puts it. Give, and it will be given to you. A good measure, pressed down, shaken together, and running over will be poured into your lap. For with the measure you use, it will be measured to you. I wonder what would show up in your life if you kept intentionally growing in your belief and your confidence and your expectation in God's relentless abundance.